Awesome. Great. Hi.
Howdy.
I just need to, good to talk to you.
Yeah, I love talking
How
to
are
people.
you?
I'm doing great. All right, you should probably be careful with your niceties now, because historically my conversations with people of your political disposition don't tend to go very well.
Can you see me, by the way? I'm just wondering. I turned it on instinctively, but I don't know.
I can see you. Do you want me to throw you up on stream?
I don't mind. Yeah, you can. Yeah,
Right,
that's
cool.
fine.
I'll do that then.
All right, cool.
All right. So hit me up. I have not yet had the time to watch your video. Give me your criticisms. I'm ready for them.
Oh, no. Yeah, I see. You would want me to give you my criticism. Unfortunately, the video I made about you it's not very useful. It's not very kind of conducive to good discussion, mostly because your video was about J.K. Rowling, and I don't, thoroughly endorse J.K. Rowling. My bigger interest is in the wider idea, and like more specifically, the reason why I would agree with someone like J.K. Rowling is because I think, what is it that you think queer theory, which is, say, the idea that gender is determined 100% by self-identity, what does that idea explain or make clearer about gender and about kind of feminist discourse? How does that help have a more robust feminist discourse?
I'm not sure if it's about having a more robust discourse as it is about mitigating harm and most accurately identifying the way in which people engage with gender.
Okay, see, that's interesting. I thought you might say that. See, for me, that's not very helpful, because it's basically saying that it's a very utilitarian way of looking at things, to say like the reason why we should believe a certain thing or affirm a certain truth is because it's going to make people happier. And I think that could easily, you would surely think, lead to all sorts of potential issues down the line.
I don't think
where
so.
Somebody can just say, oh, that doesn't, but see, for me,
well, the thing is, and you have to remember, there is no inherent truth of gender. We didn't discover gender somewhere in a forest. It's a social construct. It is what we make of it. So in the process of reshaping it to better suit human need, we're doing what social constructs are meant to do, to serve human need. There's not some inherent truth value we have to, respect or dig up.
Okay, yeah, I get what you're saying. So in other words, I would disagree on your definition of what, or your assessment of what a social construct should do. I don't think a social construct is there to to help humans, to make things nice for humans. I think a construct is there to better facilitate, and sometimes I do think it's there to help. I think it's there to better facilitate dialogue, to better facilitate understanding the world. And I don't think it's helpful to take an idea and that is very useful, that is a theory or an understanding of a concept, and say, well, we need to change that in order to make other people happier.
Yeah, but like, why would? Okay, hold on. So let's back up in this. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, that's fine.
So, understanding of what? Gender is, right, as we both agree, a social construct. There's no fundamental truth to understand. It is only a system that we have devised to explain patterns in our world. The extent to which we understand it is contingent upon its perceived existence. If to us, gender is nothing more than a system of self-identification, then if we understand it to be that, our understanding is as significant as any level of understanding could be of a more essentialist view of gender.
Right, yeah, okay. I get what you're saying, but the thing is, I would say it is, and I understand what you're saying, that basically it doesn't really exist, it's something made up. But I would say that we've made it up, and it's really useful for looking at things, most particularly, especially if you're a progressive, I think, looking at the oppression of women and basically understanding feminism. And I would say that the minute that you start saying, well, actually, I, right now, could self-identify as a woman, and suddenly I become the subject of feminism, patriarchy becomes something that affects me as a woman, that feminism should focus on my rights as a woman, I think at that point you've then taken away the utility of that construct, deconstructing patriarchy.
This is the lie that all TERFs propagate. The idea that the self-identification theory of gender in any way destroys our ability to understand power relations or meaningfully address the experience that assigned female at birth people go through. I've interacted with a lot of trans people in my life. I mean, a lot. I have never met any of them who believe that a cis and a trans person, or cis and a trans woman or man, are identical in every way, or that the experiences of a cis woman in youth are the same as a trans woman's youth. I have never met a person like that. And I have never been in a trans space and not been able to talk about the difference in these experiences. The idea that we're sanding over distinctions is just not the case. I've never seen this happen. But people like J.K. Rowling will always make this implication, or that outright statement. The idea that we are harming cisgender women, or real women, as some of them might say, by obfuscating the difference between trans and cis people, which is, I mean, it's silly. We're just saying trans women are women. There's not much else to it.
See, yeah, I understand where you're coming from. And I mean, you've stated this elsewhere. You've said, and I've heard other people say this, that, you know, black women have a different experience to white women, and lesbian women have a different experience to straight women. But I think the fundamental point is that you understand patriarchy as something where men have oppressed women, and that this has always taken a similar form of being, to a significant extent, based on biology. Now, I'm not an essentialist, and I think a lot of gender critical people are not essentialists. I don't believe that it's all 100% about biology, and I think that even things outside of biology can determine gender. But biology has a huge part in it, and you know, you're saying, well, you know, we can understand the struggles of women who also happen to have a broadly female biology, while also understanding that some women have penises. And certainly I agree you can, but I would argue, is that the best way to understand what patriarchy is in terms of the historic oppression? Like people,
patriarchy affects everyone, regardless of biology. Patriarchy affects toxic masculinity and the way that straight men experience life. Patriarchy significantly affects gay men, and they aren't oppressed by their biology. They're men. Even the beefiest, hunkiest, big muscle, colossal, beefy, gorilla-dicked gay men are still affected negatively by social conceptions relating to the patriarchy. And nobody, not even TERFs, would go up to these people and say, well, the patriarchy never affected you. Like, no, of course not. Now, there is an element of patriarchal oppression that is rooted in the biological dimorphism between cisgender men and cisgender women. That's definitely the case. But we are not, I mean, that's not being sanded over with the acknowledgement that trans women are still women. And most trans women end up getting subjected to a lot of the same physiological disparities that cisgender women do. If you talk to like a trans woman who's been living as a woman for some time, they're going to be a fuckload more nervous about walking alone at night. They're going to be a lot more nervous about spending time around cisgender men, because they now recognize that the social systems that they then would have participated in as the perpetrator are now systems which affect them. I think you are the one who is being reductive and sanding over understanding by ignoring this.
Right, okay. I'm going to have to kind of address like two things. Well, one, I wouldn't say, so obviously, yes, everybody is affected by patriarchy, but I think that it's important to understand the distinctions between how different people are affected. You know, the way I'm affected as a man is not the same as how a woman is affected. And I know you're going to say, well, yeah, sure, but you know, there's all sorts of differences within the category of women and men. However, I think that it's also important to understand that historically, within understanding what patriarchy is, and also understanding how misogynists understand patriarchy, it makes sense to say, okay, well, if you're somebody who generally fits into what would be considered a man, and I should clarify, I don't think gender is easy to define in a gender critical perspective, but I also don't think that just saying, well, it's completely up to self-identity is very helpful either, because the people who actually are oppressing men and women based on different understandings of patriarchy are doing them in very different ways, and they're doing them based on an understanding of gender that is not in line with just self-identity. And I don't think it makes sense to have a completely different sense of gender to the system you're critiquing. Because then I think you're kind of not able to communicate as easily.
We can't. In what way can I not communicate? Like, as a person who recognizes that gender is a product of self-identification, what am I missing? Like, what can't I describe? What understanding am I lacking in?
I'd say that's a good question. I'd say there's loads of things that gender critical theory explains better than queer theory. But one thing I'd say it does is I think it makes it easier to understand the oppression of gender non-conforming people. You know, you look at the big focus of transgender politics, a huge amount of it is people should be able to go to whichever bathroom it is they identify with. People should be able to go to whichever abuse shelter it is they identify with. But according also to queer theory, somebody being a drag queen, somebody being somebody who dresses up like a woman, or somebody being, a kind of autogynephilic, I don't want to use like meme terms like sissy, somebody who dresses up as a woman for
I mean,
sexual pleasure, but
autogynephilia
doesn't.
is a pretty memey term, considering it's not used anywhere in academia or medicine.
I know, yeah, I know. That's the term I know, so that's the only one. But somebody who gets off on the idea of being perceived as a woman, but they might not consider themselves to be a woman. They might consider themselves to be a man. And the issue I would think is, well, hold on a minute, aren't those people just as likely to be subject to all sorts of horrible treatment in a man's bathroom or in a man's abuse shelter as somebody who considers themselves to identify as a woman? So it seems to me,
Yeah, but
that,
how do I not know that?
well, what I'm saying is, it seems to me like queer theory muddies the understanding and properly kind of
How?
dealing with the experiences and the oppression
How?
of
Wait, no,
people
but
who
how?
are gender non-conforming. And
How?
the reason it does so is because, and again, the big focus is on women, whether they're trans women or cis women, should be allowed to go into women's shelters, because trans women are likely to face all sorts of issues in a man's shelter or in a man's prison or anywhere else. But I would say, well, hold on a minute. What about men who are gender non-conforming, who are in the exact same situation? Their issues are bulldozed over in the interest of, well, it's all
How are
about
they
being in,
bulldozed over?
because of the focus that you have, which is
No,
100%
you're
on.
perceiving the focus. I've talked about all of this before. You're inventing limitations of existing queer theory so you can criticize them for going over certain people. If you sincerely believe that TERFs have a greater degree of concern for gender non-conforming people, many of whom will then later go on to be transgender, then queer theory, which has long been a shelter for, both academically and literally, the concept of gender nonconformity, then I'm not entirely sure what to say. The idea that people are oppressed based on various characteristics associated with their gender, it doesn't begin and end with identity. It's very well right to recognize that some people who identify as a man, who are cisgender men, who are still more feminine, or gender nonconforming, might also be subject to certain patriarchal, elements of oppression. But I would never deny that. I mean, that's not a limitation that I have.
I think the focus it puts on, because you look at historically the oppression of these people, you look at where we're coming from, you look at the society that we exist in that we're criticizing. Bigots do not care, and you think about, okay, and this is just an example that I think of, which I think perfectly encapsulates this. I was an old man. Doesn't matter who the old man is, but I was watching TV with him. And do you know Eddie Izzard, the comedian Eddie Izzard?
I do not.
Okay, he's a comedian in the UK who performs in drag, and he identifies as a man. He appears on TV with makeup on, and this old man, this, let's be honest, bigot, says, ugh, like he's disgusted to see a man in drag. Now, my point is that the experience of that man, of that old bigot, judging that person for being gender non-conforming, is identical whether or not Eddie Izzard identifies as a woman or a trans person. So for me, it doesn't seem useful to take this exact same identical type of bigotry and turn it into two different types of bigotry, depending on the self-identity of the person involved.
They're highly related. I mean, they're not exactly the same. They're very related. They're different in how it's experienced by the person being subjected to it. But again, like, this isn't a limitation that I have. This is one of the problems that I have with TERFs. You poise yourself as somebody who just has legitimate concerns about the limitation of an academic framework, but your belief system leads to the harm and degradation of trans people. You're coming to me from the perspective of a bigot. You're the person who's ignoring essentially the autonomy and the academic consensus with trans people on the presumption that there is some incredibly specific and esoteric situation in which you perceive there might be limitations to queer theory. In what way exactly, and for what reason, should I not believe that transgender women are women in every such way as a cisgender woman is a woman, or at least no more so far than the difference between a tall woman and a short woman? What are the problems with my theory? What's the problem with my perspective?
Well, I think one reason why you shouldn't believe it is because the reason you state for believing it is because you want to mitigate harm, which I don't think is a good reason to affirm something
That's
true.
literally why we have social constructs. There's no truth value to pursue. You just have,
no,
they serve human needs.
Social contracts don't exist to stop people feeling upset. I mean, the reason why we have the social construct of race, and the reason why it's very useful for progressives to understand the construct of race and have a very clear understanding of what race is beyond just self-identity or anything like that, is because it helps us to understand the oppression, both historical and today, of people of color. The reason why we have the construct of gender is because it helps us to understand the oppression, both historical
No.
and current, of
We have a
people
better
predominantly
understanding
women.
now of the racial dynamics of the Roman Empire, even though our current understanding of race has nothing to do with that of the Roman Empire. You don't need to preserve oppressive social constructs to continue to understand them. There's no relationship between those two things. What then? Should we keep racism? Racism is a social construct, and by preserving racism, we preserve in amber the relations between black and white people, making it easier for us to understand the way in which these groups interact with one another. Social constructs exist because people want them to exist, or at the very least because we allow them to exist. But if we're going to change them, we have to recognize we do so with the intent of making life better for people. Isn't that what TERFs are always crowing on about? The expectations of femininity? Why should a woman be expected to wear high heels and makeup and what have you? What is that but not challenging a social construct for the betterment of the people subjected to it?
The thing is, okay, you're talking about the construct as, I mean, apart from anything else, like a moral judgment, versus a construct as an analytic tool to talk about what the disagreement is over. So racism versus anti-racism is a disagreement over a agreed construct, which is race. And anti-racism is saying, yeah, okay, race exists as a social construct insofar as its effects are real. A racist is saying, yeah, race exists for all sorts of shitty reasons, and they think that certain races are bad. In a similar way, a misogynist is somebody who says, or any kind of gender-based chauvinist, obviously usually it's going to be a misogynist, is going to say, well, gender exists, and there's one gender which is better than the other, and the person who's an egalitarian is going to say, no, gender does exist as a social construct in terms of its effects being real, but there's not one gender that's better than the other. And I don't see how it helps you or helps anyone in any way to then say, well, actually, yeah, this disagreement, but also I have a completely different understanding of gender. And in fact, you can be any gender you want based on self-identity. I don't see how.
So yeah, but you're arguing you're a transphobe. You're making a prescriptive judgment right now. You're not just saying we need to understand gender, because I understand gender just fine. You're arguing that we need to prescriptively assign certain gender roles and expectations to fit with your social preferences. If you're arguing that we need to have an understanding of gender as it exists, then fine, of course I agree with that. I've never had any trouble whatsoever relating to people's gendered experiences. I mean, I went to school for that crap, kind of. But with regards to improving the social construct, you can only do that by challenging the way it exists now. TERFs do this the same way. When they do this, oh, well, we shouldn't have to wear makeup to be a woman. We shouldn't have to wear high heels to be a woman. Woman is not a performance. Woman is whatever. What they're doing is they're challenging an existing social construct and saying that their identity shouldn't be subject to rules and regulations placed on them by society. Everyone wants to change social constructs. You're arguing against the idea of improving society.
I think it's actually funny you mentioned prescriptivism, because I think that's exactly what you're talking about. You're talking about people wanting to change constructs that say, do this, you should behave this way, this is what you should be like. That's not what gender critical feminists are talking about. Gender critical feminists are talking about the only construct that they're talking about preserving is a construct which doesn't say, do this or act this way.
Are trans women women?
No.
Yeah, and quit dressing up with your language with academic speak. You're making prescriptive judgments.
And it's not a prescriptive. I'm not saying like don't do this thing. I'm saying
you are. You're prescriptively saying we should identify, or we should have a form of gender. We should have a social construct of gender which prevents people from identifying as this or that. You're making a prescriptive judgment. The difference is mine helps people, yours hurts people. Quit dressing this up as though you're trying to just preserve in amber this academic understanding of gender that I am obfuscating with my changed definitions. I understand every conceivable social interaction that a TERF could possibly accuse me of not understanding. My question to you is, how does it make it better? How does it make the world better to say trans women are not women?
Well, first of all, I think truth is inherently valuable. And I think that having
it's a social construct, there's no inherent truth value.
Having a logical understanding, a helpful understanding of a social construct is good for the pursuit of truth. I think having one that makes sense. I don't think it makes sense to have a definition of a social construct which is completely foreign to the people who are an oppressive class, which is completely foreign to the history of that oppression.
Again,
and
right now you're just arguing against the idea of changing social constructs. People could have adapted your exact same arguments to keeping black women out of white women's spaces 60 years ago in the US. Everything you're saying right now, well, I'm not against black women. Actually, I just think we ought to recognize the fact that there are historical differences, and we should respect the logical fact that there are differences between these groups. Everything you're saying right now is just reappropriated language of bigotry that could have been used centuries ago between different groups. So I ask you again, because utility is what I am concerned with, and there is no truth value to appeal to here. It's all a matter of analysis. Why?
Well, first of all, I think that it's not the same as what you're describing. What would be the most obvious equivalent, and it's funny you bring up race, because what would be the most obvious equivalent is black women and white women are fundamentally, well, sorry, not fundamentally, are different in terms of what race they should be understood as, and that it's not about self-identity, that a white woman can't just identify as a black woman. What you're describing is instigating certain policies based on an understanding of gender, and particularly your example of keeping black women and white women in separate places. And of course, it could be black men and white men, just black people in general.
I'm just advocating for policies that make the world a better place. I can point to data to back up all of my prescriptions.
What you're describing is I'm not saying you're advocating for it. I'm saying what you're describing, you're accusing me, or you're suggesting that me saying gender exists and that it matters that we define it in a way that helps us to best understand the historical.
There is no lack of understanding, but this is the lie you keep falling back on. I don't lack any understanding. There is no scenario in which I, as a queer theorist or an intersectional feminist, could not form a decent explanation for or understanding of what's going on. This is the lie you keep falling back on. Why do we preserve bigotry? Well, because it helps us understand. But I understand everything, so you're left with naught but a defense of bigotry. So I ask you, why are trans women not women? Why should we not do this thing?
Well, because again, it does not help us to. And the thing is, okay, I want to clarify.
It helps trans women. It sure as shit helps them. Materially. You can understand anything within your conception of gender as being entirely based on self-identity. The question is it useful in terms of making things simpler, making things clearer? Because as I see it, whoa.
Theory.
Wait, you know what the simplest explanation for black crime in America is? That black people have lower IQs and have the warrior gene. That's the simplest explanation. Pardon me for not deferring to your anti-intellectual desire to just appease the simplest explanation for people who are looking to justify bigotry. I'm looking to make the world a better place.
Like the idea that trying to make things simple is inherently anti-intellectual is stupid. Like obviously, yes,
deferring to simplicity is an inherent value as opposed to like justice or like making the world a better place is, yes, very silly.
But obviously, yes, simplicity should not come in place of things which help us understand the world. But ultimately, a simpler explanation is easier. It's one which makes it easier to have discourse. It's one which makes it easier to explain things.
I explain things just fine.
Queer theory doesn't explain anything.
Wait. You could say all this about race realism.
Why?
Because you could do the same. It's much easier to explain that black people and white people are just inherently different, more different. It's very easy to explain. It's very understandable.
When they go up against evidence?
That's what I'm asking you.
We don't.
Wait, that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah, but hold on. First of all, it's important to understand this is not an evidential question. You can't have evidence for what gender should mean. All you can do is look at the facts we have and ask what explanation best helps us understand this thing.
No. Wait, stop deferring to the understanding. Okay. I understand. This is the lie. You keep repeating this. Well, I'm lacking something. I'm lacking some mote of understanding because I engage in queer theory. You realize my job on this channel is convincing people who disagree with me, right? It is literally my job to understand and disseminate information on these subjects. So your repeated insistence that we should discriminate against millions of people worldwide because it leads to an easier explanation is extremely unconvincing to me. You keep deferring back to this. Why should we do something which leads very heavily to the suicidality of a massive group of people? Why should we contradict the evidence and arguments made by virtually every reputable scientific and academic organization on the planet? Why should we spit in the faces of people who have been fighting for their civil rights for decades? Well, because it's simpler. Oh, it's easier. It's much easier to say, well, gender is your sex, rather than just saying gender is a matter of identity. Like, that's it. Like, that's your entire argument. It's just simpler. Like, it hurts your brain less. You need less wrinkles to process it. Like, is that it?
Well, again, I would clarify gender critical theory does not leave you with a simple understanding of gender. You still have a very complicated understanding of
I
gender
don't care
if
if
you
it's
believe in gender critical.
complicated.
However, by having queer theory, it becomes needlessly complicated while explaining nothing, which is a bad theory. You know, if you have a theory for why we have the fossil record, and you say, "Oh, evolution, fine," but I've got a way more convoluted theory that it was put there by the devil because he wanted to play a joke. Well,
Fossil
that's
records aren't a social
the
construct.
obvious response somebody's going to have is, yeah, and I'm not saying that the fossil records aren't the social construct. Evolution is a theory to explain the reality of the fossils.
There is
In a
no
similar way,
there is no
feminism,
reality of gender.
feminism is a theory that explains the reality of women's persecution, women's the patriarchy's attitude towards
Of
women
gender
historically.
relations.
And in a similar way, gender is a social construct which helps us explain the reality of how people have been oppressed based on their gender. And the best way to understand it is to say, okay, you've got women who have been historically oppressed this way, and that's basically
It's not just women. It's men. Wait, it's men too.
And men, and also, while
Everyone.
these people would fall into category women and men, gender non-conforming people. I would say,
all of which is affected by patriarchy. You're the one being reductive here. And there is no inherent truth to gender. There is an inherent truth to fossil records. You can carbon date. You can figure out this, that. You can identify some particular thing about this.
The point is, the point is, I'm saying that gender is the explanation for the inherent truth. There is an inherent truth to, and I don't want to go into this, but what happens to women?
Wait, but I understand that.
Yeah, and I'm saying that there is an inherent truth to what happens to women. There's an inherent truth.
Stop. Is gender real? Not just a social construct. Is gender real in a physical sense? If all of humanity were obliterated in some sort of plague, would gender still exist somewhere in the universe?
I mean, it's a pretty philosophical question. I mean, obviously,
without humans to consider it, would it exist?
No, not really. No.
Okay, so there's no inherent truth. There's no fundamental reality that we need to pay respect to. There is only the study of the interactions of different groups of people based on their gender and the relationships between gender.
And I think that
which I understand,
that a lot better.
But you keep saying it explains it better. But I understand everything you're talking about, and I can explain oppression that you can't.
Okay.
For trans people.
But why can't I explain the oppression of trans people?
Okay, what experiences does a trans woman have, and in what way do they differ from those of a cis woman?
Well, I'd imagine that trans people, well, it depends, obviously. What trans people mean can vary. I'd imagine that if we're talking about what we call kind of the most bona fide trans person, it would be gender dysphoria. The feeling that they shouldn't be a man.
No, I mean, their social experiences.
Social experience, I mean, obviously, if they kind of express their gender in a feminine way, they're going to be called all sorts of horrible things. If they really do believe they should be a woman, then they're going to feel upset when they're not allowed into women's spaces. But I mean, there's no issue explaining that. The question is
and I've had no issue explaining anything that you're talking about.
Yeah, the point is that your explanations, queer theory doesn't help you with your explanations.
You keep saying stop deferring. I can explain. There's nothing that I'm missing. You keep saying this
you
like
can't explain it. I'm saying it doesn't help you with your explanations.
What do you mean it doesn't help me with my explanations? What does that mean? This is the most esoteric. This is the Weasleiest argument ever. You're literally standing on an argument that we should oppress millions of people. We should defy academic and social prescriptions. We should ignore the medical industry and what they prescribe. We should do things which we know demonstrably and measurably hurt a huge portion of our population because you're making some esoteric argument that maybe you don't understand quite as well or it doesn't explain. Well, I can explain and understand any reality of gender interaction, and I do it through queer theory. So obviously, that argument is not very helpful in explaining why we should oppress or contribute to the oppression of such a large group of people.
You say you do it through queer theory, but queer theory, it doesn't add anything. It just
you don't know what queer theory is.
It adds a factor where, for example, somebody who is gender non-conforming, well, what would ordinarily be very easily understood is, well, if they're a man and they act like a woman, then they're going to receive oppression because of that. And that's pretty simple. But by adding this arbitrary idea of, oh, wait, no, if they really feel like they're a woman, then they're really a woman, that doesn't add anything. It doesn't help anything.
Yes, it does.
Doesn't make things
it
simpler.
Can change the way in which they experience their oppression. There's a huge difference between being a guy and dressing up as a woman and getting made fun of it, and being a woman and being made fun of for being a trans woman. The way you internalize that oppression is very different. In one case, you're just being made fun of superficially. You look silly, you're dressed up as a woman. If you're a trans woman, your very identity is being challenged. And that's a very substantive difference to the experience of the people receiving it. You're being pretty reductive, my dude. Maybe gender critical theory isn't helping you understand the world as well as you would like to.
I think that it's much better to understand the experience of so-called trans women in terms of being continuous with the experience of gender non-conforming men.
This is so boring for me. Like, you have no argument that I have any less explanatory value than you, and you're advocating for ignoring nuance, even though you came to me with the argument that I am the one bullying over nuance.
I don't think I've ever said anything to advocate
we
for ignoring
not
nuance.
Respect trans people? Stop with this. We've gone over this a dozen times now. This facile of academic pretense.
So, I mean, the problem is you want me to say what? Like, oh, I hate trans people. Well,
no. I want you to explain to me why your bad arguments should allow millions to be oppressed. I want you to tell me why that's worth it.
Well, the simple reason is I don't think that the social utility of a theory is something that should be considered when talking about like analysis. When you're analyzing patriarchy,
when we're talking about changing that social construct, that's what we do.
Yeah, but the difference is, and this is what you seem to not be getting, that gender is a social construct. Gender says nothing in itself as a social construct.
You're doing it again.
About what a woman should be.
You're doing it again.
What a man or
yeah, you are. You're making the argument that it should not be a matter of identity. You're making a prescriptive judgment, as am I. I'm just not afraid of saying that I am.
The difference is we're talking about a prescriptive judgment in terms of how to communicate and how to talk. Like, for example, saying that
this is so fucking boring to me. I don't wait. Why should millions of people be oppressed? What this sounds to me right now, I imagine from your perspective, is that I'm like triggered and I'm trying to get you to own up. You really are like disgusting to me. Like, it's pretty like plain and obvious, I think, at least to the people in my audience, that you are unwilling to actually own up to the bigotry that you're advocating for, so you're continuing to repeat this pretense of an argument. It doesn't aid to understanding. First of all, social constructs get changed all the time. Feminists have been advocating for it for centuries now. When Wollstonecraft was arguing what womanhood was and what the relationship between man and woman was 200 years ago, she was arguing for a prescriptive change in the understanding of the social relations between men and women, as is what I am arguing for right now. I stand on the backs of every feminist TERFs lay claim to the accomplishments of. The difference is I understand what they were trying to do. So please, for the love of God, no more of this. It's inherently bad to try to change social constructs. No more of this. It hurts our understanding because it clearly doesn't. No more of this idea that queer theory doesn't explain gender nonconforming people. Somehow. Explain to me why, in my scale, where I measure your heart against that of a feather, why your concerns about the academic and explanatory viability of queer theory outweigh real material harm to millions. Please, that's what I am asking you. Why?
I don't see any reason why we need to change the definition of gender in order to make people happy. I mean, first of all, there are
we already been doing that. Feminists have been doing that for centuries.
I know. What see, here's the thing, okay, when you're talking about these feminists doing this thing, you're talking about feminists saying, okay, people believe that gender should prescribe what people do, how people act, how people behave, and that's wrong. But I don't think you can lay any claim to the idea that
and also what gender is. Also, people used to believe the role of women was just to be barefoot and pregnant. You would pump 12 kids out of them by the time they were 30, and they thought it was a God-given necessity for them to do so, to propagate the kingdom. Our understanding of gender has changed. Not just what should women do, but also what gender is.
The issue is, I mean, you keep expressing what gender is in terms of what women were expected to do. I'm saying, like, if you're a man, you can do anything. If you're a woman, you can do anything. I'm not saying that we should focus on how
including identify as what
should
you want.
Behave. But I don't see the problem is you're acting as if in order for us to be progressive, we need to redefine social constructs in such a way that they no longer have
any. In the formation of this country, the United States of America, the only people who were considered full citizens were land-owning white men. The definition of a citizen had race baked into it. And we changed that definition. We didn't just say what a citizen and a non-citizen could do changed. We didn't just say, oh, black people aren't citizens, but you can do this and that. We fundamentally changed our understanding of a social construct because it made the world a better place, because it better appealed to our values of liberty, egalitarianism, and fraternity.
All right, see, here's your issue. You're describing something where, being a citizen, that matters. Because being a citizen means you are equal. It means you are respected by your government.
You're moving the goalpost again. No. You could still have a non-citizen be equal. You're moving the goalpost again.
And the point is, you're saying, though, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you are talking about something where our understanding of what it means to be a citizen has a very pronounced value attached to it.
And so does gender identity to trans people.
But no,
and so does gender identity to trans people.
Your implication, what you're implying is that in some
how
way
many non-citizens
killed
themselves because they weren't citizens? How many non-citizens in American history killed themselves because they weren't considered citizens?
I don't know.
Well, do you know how many trans people kill themselves because they feel society doesn't validate their gender identity? Clearly, it matters. You can't make the argument it doesn't matter because the data backs me up on that one. It does matter. We changed the definition of a social construct because it mattered to people.
Right. So basically, your whole thing is that you are acting as if it's crazy that I would want to define something in a way that helps to progress discourse and helps to.
Yeah, no. We did this. You're not progressing discourse. TERFs don't progress discourse. They go online and they complain about trans women going into bathrooms. You're not progressing discourse. That's why you aren't in academia. That's why academic discourse of queer theory has completely precluded all of your bullshit ideas. You aren't advancing anything. You're concerned about trans women, okay? So quit backing up to that. We've already gone over that point, and now we address the fundamental argument that you have made. We have never before changed the definition of a social construct. Well, we have.
I didn't say that. I didn't say we've never changed the definition of social construct. What I'm talking about is you're describing times when society, being bigoted, attached certain things you could do to a social construct. And your only response to this was to say, well, citizen, imagine, but a citizen, that has a very specific value attached to it. And the point is, I would say
does the gender identity of the people who identify
men and women are the same. I don't think that,
not to people who are men or women. A lot of the people in my chat have been calling you she, her because of your androgynous presentation and hair. I don't know if that.
It's a thing.
Yeah, I don't know if that particularly bothers you, but I know there are a lot of cisgender people who wouldn't particularly appreciate being misgendered either. It does matter to people. In fact, I would say most people care more about their gender identity being validated than they care about the right to vote. Whether or not you think that's a good or a bad thing is largely immaterial. Your denunciation of the importance of changing what it means to be a citizen is irrelevant because it hinges on the idea that people care more about the bounds of citizenry than they do about their identity. It's not true. So again, why should millions of people be oppressed? Please, come on, help me out here. We're talking about people dying. This is a large class of people whose needs are material and real. And all you have to defer to is the discourse. Well, we don't like changing the definition of constructs. We're the radical ones. We just want gender to stay the same as it is. Come on.
The funny thing about people saying that I'm a woman or whatever else is the issue there. It's precisely that it doesn't help to understand the relationship between genders. So in other words, the fact that I have long hair has nothing to. Well, I think queer theory has plenty to say about gender and the relationship between different genders.
Yeah, it does. But what does that have to do with queer theory? That was a complete pivot, by the way. So why?
Sorry,
millions of people. Why? Material harm. This is, I argue with Nazis a lot, and at least they have the gall to explain to me why oppression is just. I've never argued with a Nazi, and they've just sat there and gone well, by preserving the older definitions of race relations, we have a better understanding of the relationship between different groups that have contributed. It's so fucking boring. Why can't you just stand by your bigotry? Are you proud of the things that you believe and the things that you do? Are you proud of the logical consequences of your beliefs? Okay, so you're okay with hurting people. I'm not
proud of the consequences.
What is there but the consequences?
There's the fact that I feel like I can explain things better than you can.
You can't. What can you explain better than me?
I can explain the oppression of people.
How? In what way?
Gender non-conforming, because it's very obvious that the experience of me as a man being, misgendered on your chat being attacked because I am in some way going outside of
Whoa!
my
They're not
typical gender
attacking.
expression.
Whoa! They're not
Well,
attacking.
fine. Okay, fine. I don't know. I'm not looking, so I don't know. But there's a continuous relationship between that, me as a man in some way presenting more feminine, and somebody who is so sure that they want to kind of be gender non-conforming.
Do you appreciate the supreme
gender.
Do you appreciate the supreme irony of you, a TERF, saying that your theory has more explanatory power than mine because my chat misgendered you? Can we just, if we can take a moment of silence to appreciate the sublime irony of that particular criticism on your end, I would really appreciate it.
Perfectly fine, because I think the relationship between me being misgendered as a man is continuous with if I were to begin to
there are women who look like you.
More yeah, there are. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah. So what's the issue?
Well, the issue is that it doesn't help to understand.
We're not talking.
I, as a man,
what
have male privilege.
What does that have to do with anything? Why do you keep falling back to this?
Saying, people calling me a she/her is insinuating I'm a woman. Obviously,
people calling you a she/her is because they don't know what your gender is by looking at you. It has nothing to do with a prescriptive understanding that queer theory would assign to your oppressive experiences. What experience of yours can I not explain?
People calling me she/her right now.
What experiences of yours can I not explain?
It's not so much. The thing is, you're individualizing it. It's holistic. It's
what?
The point
so what? We keep doing this. What can I not explain?
You can't explain the obvious fact that the relationship between there is a huge difference between somebody being misgendered because so a trans woman, so-called trans woman, being called a man. And although that's a completely, but being made fun of for presenting as a woman, and a gender non-conforming man being made fun of for presenting as a woman.
So wait,
those two things are very similar. Whereas by contrast,
there are similarities and differences. You're the one bowling over nuance here. We've literally been over this point.
On the complete opposite side of the spectrum, you have somebody who looks very authentically like a man.
We've been
who
over
identifies
this
as a woman, and according to you, the experience of a you are looking at two people. One is a man
over this.
Who is gender non-conforming, who is made fun of for being gender non-conforming. The other one is a so-called trans woman who is gender non-conforming.
We've been over
gender
this.
conforming, as you would define it, who is made fun of for being gender non-conforming. And then over here is somebody who looks exactly like a man in every single way, who also thinks that they're a woman, who says
we've done this exact.
And according
point.
to you, these two things are the same, more so than these two things, which I just think is ridiculous.
We've done this exact point. I've addressed this exact argument. This isn't a good argument, and I know because we addressed it.
I mean,
that's it. So that's it. That's your argument for the suffering of millions of people and denying them the social legitimacy of their chosen identity. It's that well, if you take a gender non-conforming person and a transgender, well, if you have these two people and they both look like men, but they're not really. Well, I think your theory explains this a little bit less. I can't explain how it explains it less, but like, come on. You're kind of a slimy little weasel. Do you you realize that this entire time I've been trying to talk about the actual material harm done and you refuse to because you know it makes you look bad?
It's not that. It's just that
but I've asked you to it is the most relevant possible thing.
It's not. I don't think that how people feel about the way gender is defined is relevant to the definition of gender. When talking about people's emotional
social
reactions.
Constructs are oriented around utility. That's what feminists have been doing for centuries.
Again, you keep talking about social contract, not in terms of how things are defined, but in terms of the things people are expected to do. Yes, feminism has changed.
Okay, let me go over the strongest
way.
Possible relationship, the best possible criticism. What is race?
What's race? Well, it's a social construct. It's one that broadly corresponds to ethnicity. Of course, it's defined in all sorts of ways by all sorts of people. Some people say Jews are white, other people wouldn't. Some people say Slavs, but race is a social construct that is used to kind of categorize people broadly according to ethnicity.
Okay, do you think we should change our understanding of race? Not just how races are treated, but what race is?
I think that there's certainly room to change it based on the fact that race has historically been so fluid. I don't think we should just throw it all out.
I can't believe you would just say that to me. Do you have any idea how fluid gender has been historically?
Well, I am aware that there are, places in India where they have this idea as like
No,
a
no, no. The
different kind of
whole world over, there have been radically different perceptions of what gender stems from, is, and means to different cultures and different points in time. But even with race, our current conception of race, social construct as it may be, is about 500 years old. It stemmed from the perception of scientific racism that dominated the academic space during the transatlantic slave trade, to give an empirical explanation for the apparent differences in different types of people. Now, as it turns out, that understanding of race is every bit as stupid and arbitrary as what Socrates thought when he argued that the hot, thin-blooded Middle Easterners contrasted with the thick-blooded Northerners, and that was what determined their predilections.
the fact that no, yeah, okay, yeah.
It's every bit as explanatory as that. So, most reasonable people agree that our medicalized scientific perception of racism is one which actually leads to less understanding, more harm, than one if we changed it. I am a racial abolitionist.
Yeah, well, I mean that's fine, but you're saying you're a racial abolitionist, but obviously we need to actually get to a point where the effects of race aren't felt. By just saying you're a racial abolitionist and expressing that as if it's something to do with definition, I don't think it should be to do with definitions at all. I think that abolishing race, abolishing gender, yes, we should do these things.
It does
we
do with definition. Wait. What do you think abolishing gender would do for trans people?
I don't know. I mean, abolishing gender, I would say that some of them, I mean, the things, I don't think there's one kind of monolithic transgender view on it, but I would say in general, it would mean that being transgender wouldn't exist. It wouldn't really be a thing you could do if you abolished
So if
gender.
there was no gender, you realize that there would be people who look like me who would talk and present in ways we typically consider feminine.
That would be fine.
Okay.
Like yeah.
Okay.
No issue.
And there would also be people with medical dysphoria who would go to doctors, and the doctors would do some whatsits with their body to make their body look more the way they're interested in looking.
I think if we reached a point where gender was genuinely abolished, and I think we're only going to get there by having like a strong feminist discourse. By having a strong feminist discourse,
you realize you're a gender essentialist.
The actual oppression women have experienced.
How can you possibly believe your beliefs give greater explanatory value when you're a gender essentialist? You believe that gender and sex are inextricably linked, that a gender identity is predicated on your sexual biology, and now you're arguing that you want gender abolished? Do you have any idea how incongruent your political beliefs are?
Well, first of all, believing two things are incongruently linked. I can't remember what you said. I'm not very smart. Those two things are linked doesn't automatically make you an essentialist, because
you're an essentialist. What makes a person a woman?
That gender is what makes somebody a woman is a combination of biology, culture, and self-identity.
Wait, so what combination of culture and self-identity could make a person not a woman if they were born with a pussy?
Okay, yeah,
you're a Weasley little liar, buddy. You know you just think it's gender. Or you just think it's sex.
It's just sex, yeah. No. Okay, well, here's the thing, okay? Because obviously, the thing is, gender critical...
So how can a person with a penis be a woman?
It's all biology are wrong, because, of course, intersex people exist. Now, the reality is that if you have, say, for example, a hermaphrodite, somebody who has both a penis and a vagina or whatever, then some cultures might say that person should be considered a woman. Some culture might say that person should be considered a man. Some culture might say that person
what can a person with a penis
nothing.
Do to be a woman?
There is nothing. I don't think there is a thing you can do to become a woman.
Then biology then it's just biology. So I'll do the corollary. So what can a person with a vagina do to be a man?
Again, I don't think it's as simple as
so it's biology. So you're a gender essentialist.
It's not, no, because it's not. That's not just saying.
Come on.
That having I mean, to be honest, I don't care. Like, if you could show that I was a biological essentialist, it wouldn't be like the end of the world. I'm just saying as a point of fact, because I care about explaining things, and I know that if I
can't be a gender essentialist and want the abolition of gender
by biology. If I say that gender is 100% defined by biology, then that's going to inhibit my ability to explain things. It's going to inhibit my ability to explain intersex.
That has been your explanation this entire time. Gender is congruent or it's contingent on sex. That's been your argument this entire time.
There is a very strong link between gender and biology. I'm not an essentialist because I wouldn't say that that biology is the only thing 100% of the time.
Then what else? Gender. What else?
Well, again, so in my case, there is no ambiguity to my biology. There's obviously some ambiguity to my presentation, but there's no ambiguity to my biology. So I would say culture and self-identity have nothing to do with it. But there are people who, and the thing is, you queer theorists do point this out, that there are people who have ambiguous biology, and I would say that in those cases, the
Have you
person
taken
could either
hormone
be.
tests?
No, I don't know, and
Do you know
maybe
what
I
your
do have
testosterone level? I know what
I
my
may have
testosterone
XX.
level is.
No, no,
Do you
no.
know for sure? Are you positive? I guarantee
See,
you that if you and I went through a level of test together, I guarantee you, hey, listen, maybe you're a man compared to some of the girls that you know. I guarantee you that if you were put up against me, that pattern would repeat itself. How do you
I'd be very
determine where the line
impressed.
is?
Well
Where
done.
exactly is the line on intersex people? What level of
Well,
testosterone or estrogen? How
this is the
congruent should
thing.
their
That's why I'm
genitalia
not a
be?
biological essentialist.
You
Because
are.
biological essentialism means you have this line, and that's
If
stupid.
you believe
No,
a person with a penis can't be a woman, and you believe a person with a vagina can't be a man, then biology is essentially and essential to what you believe a person's gender is. How can you possibly make the argument that I lack explanatory utility with regards to my understanding of gender when you come here and how do I attack this? You're a or you're a sexual gender essentialist, but you want gender abolitionism. You think it's okay to oppress millions of people and defy the prescriptions of the medical community because you believe that it gives better explanatory value to experiences. But then I ask you to explain how it does, and you can't. The one example you've given, the incongruity between a man who just presents as a woman and a man who identifies a woman, so a woman properly, you gave that, and I answered it. So you don't have a difference in explanation possible, but you, with your gender critical theory, actually bowled over and sanded down an existing facet of nuance, which is that a man presenting as a woman and a man who identifies as a woman or a trans woman experience their oppression in different ways internally, which is essential to understanding the multiplicity of the patriarchy. When women are affected by the patriarchy, it's not just how they're treated. A man and a woman both being slut-shamed is not the same, not just because of their biology, but because of how they perceive it. I can understand that because my theory has a greater explanatory value than yours.
I never ever said that somebody who has gender dysphoria is not going to experience, being attacked for being gender nonconforming differently to somebody who does not have gender dysphoria. I think there's no reason why gender critical feminism can't explain that. I think, and I would say again, that gender critical feminism explains better the fact that somebody having gender dysphoria who is attacked for presenting as a woman, assuming they're a man, obviously, assuming assuming that they are male assigned at birth, somebody with gender dysphoria presenting as a woman is going to experience something much more similar to a man, a genuine man who also presents as a woman, than they are to somebody who is male assigned at birth, considers themselves a woman, but does nothing in any way to express as a woman. That person's the oppression that person.
There was nothing I didn't understand.
Yeah, I'm not saying. The thing is, you seem to think it's all about can you understand something.
No, you think that. I think social constructs are about utility, and so does everybody else. I've never even argued with a TERF who made the arguments that you've made before. They make the arguments that the world is a better place if you don't treat trans women as women. You backed off that. You wouldn't even defend that argument. You're just defending this esoteric concept that there's an explanatory difference, which is, in addition to being wrong, deeply dishonest, because we both know you don't care about explanatory value. You care about your intuitive belief that trans women aren't women, and you... Well, I can't extrapolate your views any point beyond that.
Well, intuition is, I think, a fantastic benefit that gender critical theory does have. I think
that is. Hey! Wait. That is the perfect way to end this conversation. Okay, I agree. Cool. Intuition is on your side.
Thank you.
All right. Do you want to shout out your channel?
Yeah, sure. It's
All right. God, that was such a fucking weaselly little I will give credit where credit is due. I've never actually argued with a person who immediately retreated on the utility argument and then just made arguments on and then only made arguments on like the explanatory validity of... God, it's simpler, so... All right, let's go over that. Did I seem frustrated? I was frustrated, that discussion. I'll acknowledge that. I don't know if it was possible to avoid being frustrated. That person was insanely slippery. Yeah, every single time I was trying to like hold to a point. Yeah. Because I've argued with TERFs before, and the thing is, I actually sympathize a little bit with TERFs who argue from utility, because there are people out there who legitimately believe that letting trans women into like women's bathrooms hurts those women. And those people are wrong, but at least it's possible those perspectives come from some, some legitimate concern. That's totally possible. But with this guy, does anyone ever make a decision on does anyone ever like make a decision on the like what prescriptive judgments we should make based on the idea that it is simpler to explain things in a more harmful way? That is so strange to me. Haven't you debated him before? No, I don't think so. Yeah, that was really weird. At the end, intuition is in our favor. I don't know. Damn, God, that's so weird. Well, let me think. Let me think. 2 minute improvement. 2 minute improvement. I don't know. I mean, I feel like he was just like arguing from feelings the whole time. I feel like that was pretty much all, right? They're probably watching right now. I mean, if they're watching right now, like holy fuck, you were so frustrating to talk to. But you have to understand the sublime irony of somebody who calls themselves a radical feminist arguing against changing the meaning of a social construct. That is insane to me. What do you think feminists have been doing forever? What do you think they've been doing this entire time, I don't know. Really weird. And then I made the citizenship argument, but he was arguing like, well, people care about being a citizen. Well, bitch, trans women care about being women. I don't know. So weird.